we're recording.
Alright. We are demonstrating how to replace the LED source lamp for the Chauvet Q-Spot 260 LED. Now, we sourced these LEDs from China, but after replacing 3 out of the 4 so far, have had 0 problems, and they look fantastic being replaced. So we're going to show you what we've found to be a pretty efficient way to get into the fixture, remove the housing, replace the diode, and put it back together. So we're going to start by taking off the fixture housing. A good tool, a good plan to have, is a safe, clean workspace so you're not losing any of these screws, because you will hate yourself when you do. Just like that. Prime example. Finding a good way to keep your tools. You're going to want good lighting for you to be able to see all of the various different internal components. Keep this to the side. We're going to now flip it and take off the other panel. I'm going to do it this way so I can stop losing screws. And now, just remove the whole piece as one, keeping the screws inside so we don't lose them. Now, we remove the body. Now, since we've gotten this whole fixture apart, we might as well go ahead and give it a very thorough internal cleaning as well. So I'm also going to remove the front lens retention ring. Same manner, keeping the screws inside so I don't lose them. Again, we're going to flip this so we don't lose these. There are these 4 screws, keeping them. It's probably a good idea to try and keep the screws all set together based on what they're for. So when you go to put it back together, you're not guessing what's what. We're also going to remove this focusing lens. Now, a word to the wise. These screws are held into these binding posts, and the binding posts themselves are screwed into the frame beneath them. Now, if you're not careful, these screws can very easily get stripped out. So what I advise is taking a screwdriver, and before you just start yanking in there, make sure you've got a nice good fit of the Phillips head into the teeth of the actual screw. Give it a nice good twist. Before you unscrew all of them, go ahead and just give them all a loosen. We got pretty lucky with this one. Go ahead and remove these screws. And we're removing this piece just so that we have a little bit better access to internal lensing to clean. Now, I'm not going to show you how to get all the way into the internal lenses of this, because that would require removing all of these extra circuitry boards, these retention frames. That's a little more than what we're trying to do just for this. So, we've removed this. We have access to clean the prism, the focus lens, the gobos, and you can kind of see in there, there's a good bit of dust. These fixtures haven't been cleaned in a while. Before you replace the diode, you should clean out the entire fixture as best you can, so when you go to replace that diode, if you haven't cleaned yet, then when you blow all this out, you risk getting all that junk on your nice new clean diode. It's kind of taking a step backwards. So, we're going to go ahead and remove this diode so we have a little bit better. You need to start by removing the fan and fan housing from the 3 binding posts. Also, you will need to remove the fan power cable, which is zip tied to this binding post. Be very careful when snipping these zip ties. You don't want to cut through the cable accidentally. Go ahead and trim that one and that one, and you'll just replace these at the end with new ones. Now we've got that free. You don't need to remove the screws that are holding this outer grill to the fan. You just need to remove the screws that are holding it into the binding post. And again, these screws are very prone to getting stripped out if you're not careful. So I advise taking, again, the proper size screwdriver getting it in that groove. And see, that one's kind of fighting me. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you a trick how to avoid this. That one I know is going to try and strip, so I'm not going to try and push it. I'm going to go move on to a different one here. He's nice and free. I'm going to move on to the third one here. He's trying to fight me. You want to keep good pressure in on it. There you go. So you may hear it do a little crack. That's just that somebody has over-tightened that screw before and you can't get it out. Just giving that little bit of crack is not a bad thing. But if you feel the metal starting to slip and you start to strip, stop what you're doing and try and find another way to do it. If you do end up stripping the screw out, you'll probably need to go to Home Depot or something like that and buy one of those stripped screw removal tools. This particular screw is a metric sized screw. Specifically, it is a M4 metric 4 0.07 by 8 millimeter screw. That's the one you want to go replace it with. The head on the screw is a tiny bit larger than the actual one coming from the manufacturer. It still lines up just fine. So if you do end up stripping one out, this is what you replace it with. Now, I had one here that started fighting me and I didn't want to risk stripping it out. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that for a minute. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and remove these binding posts because I need to get them out of the way so that I can get into the actual heatsink. So these binding posts are actually screwed and threaded into this frame itself. So what you want to do, take your nice good C-wrench, get a nice good grip on the actual binding post itself. It is a hex, let's see, is it hex? Yep, it's a hex-sided fixture, so you should be able to grab it nice and easy. Get a nice good grip on it, and you should be able to loosen it with your C-wrench and start unscrewing it. Now, as you begin to unscrew it, it's going to try and start pushing into this fan. You've got a little bit of wiggle room on the fan. You can just kind of push it or pull it away from the fixture itself a little bit to get yourself that extra room you need. And that binding post comes right out. Stick that to the side, don't lose it. Now we're going to do this other one over here. Same process. We need to grab our C-wrench, get a nice short turn on it, and that should be enough just to break it loose. Then you just hand tighten it. Now, remember this third one was fighting me because I'm thinking it's getting stripped. What you can do is now that you remove those two, actually take the entire housing, and this can be applied to any of the 3 binding posts that might have gotten stripped. Grab the entire housing and the binding post at the same time and try rotating it. If it starts unscrewing the binding post, take your C-wrench and go ahead again and grab that binding post so that it is not able to spin yet. Grab the entire fan housing and spin it. And what that's actually going to do is it's going to start unthreading that stripped screw. So now that it's got a little bit of loose play on it, now you have enough room that you can come in and unscrew it the rest of the way without stripping it out and having to replace it. So there we go. We replaced that third one. Now we're going to take this fan, we're just going to very gently let it hang right here. Now you want to be careful about it, you want to try not let it flop around because it's only being held in by some little zip ties here. So you want to try to keep it in a nice place. We need to now remove this third binding post. Same process, grab it with a C-wrench, gently loosen it, and now it should just unthread. Okay, now we have access to the entire lamp housing and heatsink. The heatsink housing is held on by 3 screws, 1 up here and 2 down here. You need to remove all 3 to get the heatsink off. Now be advised, once you remove this, these cables are still tight on it and are still holding it in. You need to be careful not to yank too hard as you could risk ripping them. So we're going to remove these. These are a little bit longer so that you'll see why. I'll show you in a minute what they have to push through. Okay, now that you've removed all 3 screws, the heatsink housing is now free to move about. We are going to roll it up so that we can remove the cables that are attached to the actual diode itself so that we can work with this. So very gently, we're going to grab it, we're going to roll it ever so gently so that we're not risking anything to it. There is a binding for a heat sensor. I believe that's what it is. Down here, there are 2 screws that are holding that heat sensor in. You're going to need to take, I'm not sure if I can show you here, but I'll show you once it's removed. You want to take your Phillips head and loosen the 2 screws that are holding that binding against the heat sink itself. I've got some that are trying to strip on me here. I want to be very careful about this. That one came out. Be very careful here. There it goes. Nope, that actually stripped it out. Yep, but it was enough. I'll show you how to repair that in a minute. It's enough so that that heat sensor just comes right out, leaving the retention housing still on the diode. That removes this piece off to the side so that you can now have access to the power input here and the sensor input here. We want to go ahead and remove this sensor pin first. It's a little bit more delicate of a cable. We don't want to risk hurting it. It's being held in by a little bit of a lip, and I'll show you as we get closer here. Best way that I recommend to remove this is take a very, very small flathead, something that has a semi-sharp edge to it so that you can get in and kind of wedge it out.